We finally have a Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K Pro in our hands for us to test and have a look at. And considering we didn't do a deep dive on either the Pocket 4K or 6K, we thought we would do one all about the 6K Pro. So let's get into it. The sub £5,000 video and cinema camera market is incredibly saturated right now. Honestly, it is insane how many awesome cameras are on the market currently. However, one thing that Blackmagic have always tried to do with the Pocket series of cameras is to keep the price down, and they have managed to do that again with the Pocket 6K Pro. The 6K Pro is only around £400 more expensive than the Pocket 6K, which still positions it way below its competition. It's actually the most affordable Super 35 camera currently available with a built-in ND system, which is a huge feature for the camera to have at that price point. We've shot quite a lot on the Pocket 6K in the past, and with the Pocket 6K Pro featuring the same sensor and chipsets, the image is identical. We chose to grab a 6K for our content creation studio because of the resolution and B-roll. However, we wanted to shoot some more creative tests with the Pocket 6K Pro using some of the new features that it has over the 6K. So we took the 6K Pro to a recent shoot comparing the Red Komodo Zcam S6G and S6, which will be out soon. So make sure you're subscribed if this is something that interests you. Let us know what you think of the image down in the comments below. Now let's talk about the technical details of the camera, starting off with the sensor and how it performs. The Pocket 6K Pro features the same 23.10 by 12.99mm Super 35 sensor, which is rated for 13 stops dynamic range, features a dual native ISO of 400 and 3200, and has a maximum recording resolution of 6144 by 3456, and has a pixel pitch of 3.76 microns. Personally, I think that 6K is a really nice spot as an acquisition resolution. I think it's not only future-proof, but you also get all the benefits of working with higher resolutions without the massive data rates that could be possible with 8 or 12K. This means that when you are delivering in 4K, you can benefit from improved image quality by downsampling and have more resolution to play with when reframing or applying stabilization in post. Now let's talk about crop factor. When using the full sensor in its 6K mode, you have a crop factor of 1.55 times, when compared to a full frame width of 36mm. When shooting in B-RAW, the camera is cropping the sensor every time you change your resolution. This means that as you lower your resolution, your crop factor goes from the 1.55 times of 6K all the way down to 3.33 times when in the 2.8K 17:9 mode. When it comes to rolling shutter, the performance of the 6K Pro is the same as the 6K. At roughly 19.7 milliseconds when shooting 6K, it isn't what I would call fast. When you compare this to the roughly 9 milliseconds readout speed of the A7S III, which has a much larger sensor than the Pocket 6K Pro, you will see a big difference between the two. It does get better as you crop in, but you are reading such a small portion of the sensor at 2.7K, that isn't surprising. I would be very particular about the situations and subjects you shoot with the Pocket 6K Pro or Pocket 6K, as you will see some bad yellow if you are panning too quickly or wanting to capture fast subjects. However, if you don't do those things, it's perfectly adequate, but I do hope that Blackmagic improve this in their next iterations of the Pocket cameras. When adjusting the ISO, the camera will switch between the two different native ISOs in the background depending on what ISO you select. When the ISO is set between 100 and 1000, the native ISO is 400, and when using ISO 1250 to 25600, the native ISO is 3200. And this means that if you need to shoot at 1000 ISO, it would actually be better to shoot at 1250 ISO and adjust for the slight increase in exposure. Blackmagic has created these charts that show the relationship between the ISO selection and dynamic range allocation. Just bear in mind that the Pocket 6K is better than previous Blackmagic cameras for low light, but it isn't a no light camera like current offerings from brands such as Sony. With the Pocket 6K Pro not featuring an OLPF, it's unsurprising that it suffers from some aliasing. If this is something you'd rather not experience, raw light make an OLPF for the Pocket 6K, but we haven't tested this with the Pro, so this may or may not work. The Pocket 6K and the 6K Pro are rated to capture up to 13 stops of dynamic range, and as we mentioned earlier, the camera has two different base ISOs, which change the amount of dynamic range the sensor is rated for. The second base is around a stop to 2 stops worse than the first base, and though the camera is rated for 13 stops, this will be more than what you can really expect in real world scenarios. We also ran our regular control tests, which we compared it to the Komodo C70 and the Zcam F6. When it comes to overexposure, we lit using false color on the 6K at both of its native ISOs. When I refer to over or under exposure, that is referring to the mid-grade chip, which is third from the right on the bottom row. Sam's skin is sat roughly 1 stop above that. We shot with our 55mm Zeiss Otis Prime across all 4 cameras. We lit for T11 and then opened up the lens a stop at a time until we hit 6 stops over. We then brought the footage into Resolve and then leveled them all out to see how each camera performs. So when we shot these tests, we did capture at both of the camera's native ISOs. However, the second set of tests were corrupted. We think this may be due to how hot the CFast card got. However, we still managed to capture at the camera's low base of 400. This is something that's happened several times while shooting with the camera, and it's something that I want to test further. However, we have raised this issue with Blackmagic. Anyway, back to the tests. The 6K Pro handles up to 3 stops overexposure well, but at 4 stops, you can see that the skin on the right side of Sam's face completely goes. You can also see a big change in the color chart here too. 5 and 6 stops get as bad as you expect. The C70 performs better. At 4 stops over, there is far less color shift and skin is held much better. The Komodo performs a touch better, with improved handling of color and Sam's skin at 4 stops over. The S6 does very well holding color and highlight detail even up to 4 stops. However, you can again see Sam's skin on the right start to break here. Overall, the Pocket does alright here, but it definitely isn't the best performer out of the bunch. For underexposure, we lit for T2 and then closed down the lens a stop at a time until we hit 6 stops under. The 6K performs decently, with color held well down to 5 stops under. However, noise does get very heavy towards 3 stops. The image also shifts green the further underexposed you go, but this is somewhat correctable with white balance tint adjustment. The Komodo performs similarly to the 6K Pro. It holds color well down to -5 and the image shifts green as you go through the stops. The C70 does a really good job holding color down to -5 too, where stuff does get noisy, but color accuracy is still really good all the way down to -6. The S6 does a good job too when it comes to color rendition, down into 4 stops, but starts getting noisy at around 2 or 3 stop range. Like the Pocket 4K and the 6K, the Pocket 6K Pro can shoot both ProRes and B-RAW internally. However, the 6K Pro has a slightly updated set of options. This is the addition of 2 additional constant quality options, Q1 and Q3, as well as the ability to shoot B-RAW in 4K DCI, which wasn't available with the Pocket 6K. One very popular question that we saw on our previous Pocket 6K Pro video was what the crop factor of it is in this mode, or whether or not the sensor is scaling when shooting in B-RAW in 4K, which it isn't. To calculate crop factor, we know that the 6K sensor width is 23.1mm, so if we take the horizontal resolution of 6144 and divide it by 4096, you get 1.5. 23.1 divided by 1.5 equals 15.4. So 15.4mm is the width of the sensor being used in DCI 4K B-RAW. So if you want to compare this to full frame, you get a rough crop factor of 2.33 times. So quite heavy. B-RAW is a 12-bit codec in which you can shoot in either constant bitrate or constant quality. Constant bitrate allows you to select from 4 compression ratios: 5:1, 8:1, 12:1, and 18:1. It's best to use constant bitrate encoding when you want more predictable file sizes or want to capture with as little compression as possible, which would be 3:1. You also have constant quality. This is for optimized quality with variable bit rates, for which you now have 4 options. Q0 has very little quantization and will give you the highest quality of the variable bit rates, while Q5 uses more quantization for more efficient encoding and reduced file sizes. Having both fixed and variable bitrate options means you have the ability to record in either great quality or with higher compression to save on storage, all while keeping the flexibility that comes with B-RAW. Unlike other camera companies, Blackmagic allows users to choose any compression method regardless of what format you are in, even when there are some that you just simply can't record, as the camera doesn't have a way of capturing the data rates that it would produce. I would really suggest turning on the stop recording if car drops frames setting and testing your media to see how far you can push it. With this setting off, when your camera drops frames, an exclamation mark will begin to flash in the middle of the on-screen record button. However, with the stop recording mode on, the camera will just cut as soon as it starts dropping frames. As well as B-RAW, you can shoot in ProRes 42HQ, 42, 42LT, and 42 Proxy in DCI 4K, UHD, and HD. It's great to have the option for ProRes in case you need it for quick turnaround times in post. However, I would otherwise suggest shooting B-RAW when you can, but it's great to have both options in case you need it. When shooting in ProRes, you can also change the level of sharpening between default, medium, and high in camera. To help you understand what media you need for whatever format you want to shoot, I have made this Excel document. I created this from Blackmagic's quoted numbers that are on their website for 30 FPS across the different formats. I've also color coded it to show the minimum required media to handle the theoretical data rate. We'll recommend some media in a bit, but if you want to know what media type you need to shoot in for the format you desire, the link to this database is in the description below. When it comes to off-speed frame rates, the Pocket 6K Pro features the same options as the Pocket 6K. You can do up to 50 frames per second using the full 6K sensor, or 60 FPS in 6K 2.4:1 or 5.7K. That's pretty amazing. You will also be able to shoot 60 frames per second in a 3.7K 6x5 anamorphic mode. Currently in the anamorphic mode, your only option is a 2x D-squeeze, which is enabled by default when you go into the 3.7K mode. In the full 6K mode, you can toggle a 1.33 D-squeeze in the menu, but you cannot do this in any other format. Hopefully Blackmagic can add a range of anamorphic D-squeezes in camera, as well as making this a separate setting in the menu so you can toggle squeezes regardless of what format you are shooting in. You can also shoot up to 120 frames per second in 2.8K 17:9, which is pretty awesome. All of these different resolution modes while shooting in B-RAW will be cropping in on the sensor like the previous Pocket cameras, so your crop factor will change depending on what resolution you want to shoot in. In ProRes, frame rates are very similar. In DCI 4K, you can shoot up to 60 FPS, in UHD, you can shoot up to 50 FPS, and in HD, you can do up to 120 FPS. In DCI 4K, it is downsampling a 5.7K portion of the sensor. In UHD, you can choose between using a 6K or 5.7K area of the sensor, while in the HD mode, you can toggle between 6K, 5.7K, or 2.8K. And switching between these modes will change the maximum off-speed frame rate you can capture, 50 being the highest in 6K, 60 in 5.7K, and 120 in 2.8K, while in HD. These are a good range of frame rates to choose from, and though the crop factor is quite extreme with the 120 FPS mode, it's definitely usable. With the release of the 6K Pro, Blackmagic are also adding their Generation 5 color science that is in the Ursa 12K to the whole Pocket lineup. It was possible to use Gen 5 in post before, but you couldn't shoot or monitor it in camera. We shot some comparisons for our Ursa 12K video we released last year, so these clips are from the 12K, but will still illustrate the difference between Gen 4 and Gen 5. There seems to be a lot of improvements between the two, but let's take a look at what's really going on here. We've shot one clip to showcase the difference between the two. Gen 4 had some issues that people found. One of those was the oversaturation of reds. A good example of this is the brake lights on cars, which you can see here. However, with Gen 5, this issue has been fixed, and now the reds aren't anywhere near as saturated, even with less extreme saturated reds like this shot here. Gen 4 also had issues with oversaturating blues as well, and again this has been fixed with Gen 5. When you compare the two, otherwise, you can see that Gen 5 has a slightly flatter image than Gen 4. However, with how B-roll works, you aren't changing how much dynamic range or what color information you are capturing, just how it is interpolated. It looks like Gen 5 is handling how contrast is applied on the gamma curve a little better, which is why pale skin and highlight roll-off appear to be handled a little bit nicer. It does however seem that some of the color mapping issues Gen 4 had are still present in Gen 5. So if you want to start your grade at the most neutral point possible, you will still need to correct this in Resolve first. The Pocket 6K and the 6K Pro feature the same options with defining the color gamma and gamma space. You have film, which is basically Blackmagic's log profile, video, which is similar to Rec 709 for fast acquisition and delivery, and extended video, which offers a balance between the video and film look. This extended video setting offers a wider dynamic range than video while applying a mild contrast change with a smooth roll-off in the highlights. Extended video is suitable for use with standard broadcast monitors and is a helpful setting if you have limited time for post-production and want to record your clips with a pleasing look applied in camera. If you're shooting in B-roll, you can switch between these in post. However, if you're shooting in ProRes, this will be baked in camera. If you're wanting to shoot with a look in camera, you can also burn LUTs into your ProRes clips. When it comes to how to best expose the camera, there's a range of exposure tools, but I would say working with false color is going to give you the most accurate results. As we mentioned earlier, exposing at one of the camera's dual native ISOs will give you a good balance of noise and dynamic range. When using false color, Blackmagic have kept the same 38.4% IRE for 18% grey, which is represented as green. Purple is black detail loss, blue is near black detail loss, pink is one stop over mid-grey, which is where Caucasian skin should sit, yellow is where 80% on the zebras will be, and is when you are nearing white clipping, and lastly you have red, which is 95% on zebras and is where you start clipping your highlights. As with other Blackmagic cameras, I would kick a little bit more light than what you'd think you would need, as it prefers to be overexposed than underexposed, which is what we saw in our tests earlier. But just remember, as soon as your highlights are clipped, they are gone, so expose wisely. One of the biggest additions to the 6K Pro is a motor-driven ND system, which provides 2, 4 and 6 stops of IR-ND filtration, as well as a clear filter. This motor is a new system which they haven't used before with the previous Ursa cameras. The filters are controlled via 2 buttons on the back of the camera, and these buttons are positioned really well. They're just under where your thumb lies while hand holding the camera. In the menu, you can decide how you want the ND level to be represented on the back of the camera, which can either be the number, stop, or fraction. I would personally use stop here. From what we can see, the ND system seems to stack the different filters, and this is backed up even further when we look at how back focus is changing as you go through the filters. We used our DENS flange focal depth tester to see just how much it is shifting. With the ND set to clear, which is what it's set to until an ND is engaged, our Pocket 6K Pro straight out of the box was out by 60 microns, which is quite a lot and would probably mean that you couldn't hit your infinity on some lenses. When you introduce 2 stops of ND, it then shifts to 80 microns, and this must be because the 2-stop ND is in front of the clear. When you go to 4, it then goes back to around 60 microns, and then it shifts back to 80 again when you engage 6 stops. So the camera looks to have clear and 4 on the same distance from the sensor, and then the 2 stop looks to be in front of that, which is why you have the 20 micron shift. Clear just has the clear engaged, 2 engages the 2-stop ND at the front, 4 engages the 4-stop ND at the back, and then 6 engages both the 2 and the 4 at the same time. Unfortunately, you can't shim the EF mount of the Pocket 6K Pro, which means that you will be stuck with this. These measurements are just from our camera and may be different from yours, however. One way around this is shimming your lenses to match this being out, but this will then put them out on any other camera system you use, which isn't ideal, and some EF lenses won't even let you shim them, so it would mean that you couldn't fix this issue. Another solution is to use Wooden Camera's PL mount mod, as this allows you to shim it. However, it will then require the use of PL lenses, which may not be possible for you. We also wanted to see if the color changed as you step through the range, So we grabbed our Otis 55mm and lit for 6 stops of ND, and then opened up the lens to compensate the change in ND. So if you can see any vignetting at 6 stops, that's a result of the lens, not the ND. Resolving power looks consistent throughout the ND range, and colour shifts purple as you stop through the range. IR pollution is also something that Blackmagic cameras have suffered with in the past, especially in the 6K while using NDs without IR cut. Blackmagic claims that the NDs featured in the 6K Pro do feature IR cut, but how much and how well does it work? Well, for these tests we grabbed a range of different black fabrics, as different types will behave differently to each other, and then blasted 2 ARRI tungsten lights at them. We then shot a clear 2, 4 and 6 stops of ND to see how this affected the cast. These NDs do seem to cut some IR pollution, but not enough as certain fabrics are still heavily affected. We also ran into this issue while shooting outside in the sun, and you can see Joe's hat here looks burgundy, but in fact it's black. We really suggest picking up a low strength IR ND that you can put onto the front of your lens to cut this out and not affect your image too much. Check out our recommendations below in the description for that. Blackmagic have kept the same EF mount from the Pocket 6K on the Pocket 6K Pro. Personally, I wish Blackmagic would have used a shorter flange mount, such as RF or L mount. However, I know that this would have made developing the ND system much harder and costlier. The main benefit of using a native EF mount is not having to use an adapter to use EF glass. This means you aren't adding another point of failure when out shooting and reduces your chances of having play in your mount, which will affect how your focus pulls. However, one downside of EF mount over RF and L is the increased flange distance. This means that EF is more limited to what lenses you can mount on the camera, whereas the shorter MFT flange of the 4K means you can mount a huge range of vintage or even cinema lenses with the correct adapter. You can also use focal reducers on the 4K, which means you can achieve much wider field of views than you can with the 6K. As you mentioned earlier, wouldn't camera have a PL mount mod kit for the 6K that will allow you to change the EF mount to PL, and this looks like it should work fine with the 6K Pro, but it's something we do need to test fully. However, I did see John Brawley has converted his Pocket 6K Pro using this kit, and it looks to work fine from his posts online. This could be handy for people who are buying the camera as a B or C camera to their existing kit and are wanting to use their current PL lens set. Just bear in mind that this mod limits what PL mount lenses you can use to the ones with rear protrusions less than 40mm. Wouldn't camera have a compatibility chart, which I've linked down below. The Pocket 6K Pro also features a new 5-inch tiltable touchscreen which has a peak brightness of 1500 nits. This new back screen is so much better than the one found on the Pocket 6K, and is something that owners of the previous Pocket cameras have wanted since the original 4K release. So much so that Tilter actually made a modification for this, so it's nice to see Blackmagic listening to its users. The increased maximum brightness to 1500 nits now means that the screen is much easier to view while operating outside, even at around 75%. I don't know the exact brightness of the previous screen on the 6K, but it looks to be around 500 nits, so it's much brighter than the one on the previous Pocket cameras. The screen can also tilt face up to around 90 degrees and tilt down to around 45, which will make it really easy to view at a range of angles. The viewing angles of the monitor are actually really impressive, so that combined with the tilt will mean that you'll be able to see the screen no matter what. However, one issue we did run into was with the colour of our monitor. We actually managed to grab 3 demo units for our showroom stock, and the first one we grabbed had a massive colour shift on the screen. We first noticed this when we started shooting with our Ninja 5 for our tests, and thought it could be an issue with the back monitor quality on the 6K Pro. However, when compared to our other demo units, this blue tinted screen seems to be the outlier, with the other two looking not quite as bad, so it seems like we've got a more problematic unit. Though even our other demo units don't look anywhere near as accurate as our Ninja 5 or the Pro EVF. I would strongly advise you to check the image on your 6K Pro against a trusted monitor to see if your back screen is suffering from any issues as well. If this goes unchecked, not only is checking the colours in your scene going to be more difficult, but your white balance could be thrown off too. This isn't too much of an issue when shooting in B-RAW, but when shooting in ProRes, this could be very problematic. This is something that Blackmagic could fix fairly easily, as it should just involve them shifting the white point of the displays, but this will be different from unit to unit, so would most likely require the camera being sent back in, but we'll have to see. All in all, the addition of the new screen to the 6K Pro is great, and for some, will save them having to spend the extra cash on a daylight viewable monitor. However, the colour inconsistency on the back LCDs could be an issue with your unit, so please double check. With the 6K Pro, Blackmagic also released the Pro EVF, which mounts onto the top of the 6K Pro. This mounts onto the top of the camera by removing a plate here. that uses a single flathead screw. With the EVF attached, it's similar to the positioning of most DSLR or mirrorless cameras. However, you can tilt it 70 degrees, which will make it much better ergonomically, especially when on a tripod. The tilt means that it is so much better to use than a regular stills viewfinder. You have so much more flexibility to position it, which makes it awesome when trying to get more creative angles. The EVF uses a micro OLED display with a resolution of 1280 by 960 and has a refresh rate of up to 60 Hz. It also features a 4-element adapter that ranges from -4 to +4, which is a good range no matter your prescription. It also comes with 4 interchangeable silicone eye cups, including small, medium, left eye and right eye. These simply pull and push on. Personally, I think these come off way too easy. They don't require much force to pull or knock off, so be careful while out shooting on location, as you may end up losing a cup, which we nearly did several times while out filming with the camera, so be careful. I would suggest deciding on which cup suits you best and fixing it to the EVF. Now this could be done quite neatly with some black electrical tape or some glue. The EVF also has a proximity sensor that will toggle between the monitor and the EVF being on or off, but you can't toggle this yourself. So if you want to just stick with either the EVFs or the screen, you can't, which is a bit of a shame. Hopefully this is something they could add via firmware. You also can't change the sensitivity of the proximity sensor, which is a shame as it switches back to the monitor a touch too soon for our liking. While looking down the EVF, you can toggle a 2x punch in using the back button. You can then use the front dial to zoom in from this 2x punch in all the way to 8. Once you get to the magnification you want, you can then click the wheel in to change the mode, which will then change the dial's movement to movement around the frame instead of zoom. One nice detail is that the camera remembers where you've punched into, but this is something that is forgotten when you boot the camera down. If you toggle the zoom via the double tap on the back of the camera and then bring your eye to the EVF, you can actually move this by using the touchscreen. However, you can't do it if you toggle the zoom while looking down the EVF. In the menu under monitor, you can select a range of monitoring assists that can be output to the EVF or just have a straight clean feed. This consists of whether you want your LUTs being output to the EVF, zebras, focus assist, frame guide, grid, safe area guide and false color. You can also toggle the status text on or off, show your audio meters or the codec and resolution you're shooting in. The layout in the EVF is very similar to the menu. You can also adjust the brightness and toggle something called smooth motion. This mode is for changing the frame rate you see in the viewfinder, as viewing frame rates under 30p with this off will be very choppy. So turn this on if you want a nice smooth viewing experience no matter what your base frame rate is. Lastly, you can toggle a focus chart in the monitor. And this is so you can focus the diopter to your eye no matter the image the camera sees. This is a really smart addition that makes focusing the diopter for you an absolute breeze. When it comes to the actual image quality, the pictures seem sharp enough to hit your focus, but the actual size of the monitor in the EVF feels a bit small. The image feels like you're quite far away from it. Color and brightness seem good, but after using the built-in EVFs on the A7S III and the R5, it does leave us wanting something a bit better. But it's great to have the option to add this if you really want an EVF. It would be really cool to see a cabled extension unit that would allow users to mount this off of the camera, as it would make it much more versatile, especially for shoulder rigs. The Pro EVF is priced at £510 and is only compatible with the Pocket 6K Pro. And this means that the Pocket 6K Pro with the EVF comes in at a price of £2,764. So it is pricey, but when compared to the price of a more universal EVF, it's under half the price of even the lower price ones. So it's nice that Blackmagic have given users the option to pick it up or not, instead of just including it with the camera and bumping up the price. Blackmagic has also changed the battery type that the camera takes. The Pocket 4K and 6K take Canon's LP6 battery, and they are both renowned for their large power draws, which mean they absolutely chew through LP6s incredibly quickly. The 6K Pro now uses Sony's very popular MPF 570 battery, which should provide some longer run times. The battery spec that is on Blackmagic's website for both cameras is shooting with the same settings to the same media at the same screen brightness, and the larger MPF battery only gives you 15 minutes extra. I really wish they'd used a larger version of the MPF like the 970 here, which would have given much more power to it. I would also keep an eye out when picking up MPF batteries, as they aren't all created equal. The milliamp hour or watt hour will vary depending on what version you pick up. One really great balance of cost and power is Hawkwood's DV F590s or Blackmagic's own MPF battery. both of which offer around 3500 mAh or 25 watt-hours of power instead of the 2200 mAh or 15.84 watt-hours of the official Sony ones. While recording 6K B-RAW 8:1 at 25p with the screen at 50% brightness, a fresh battery that came with the camera lasted around 1 hour and 10 minutes, which is just over what Blackmagic have quoted. I was very surprised by this performance, and in practice, running MPFs is so much better than LPE6. With the 6K Pro announcement, Blackmagic also announced the Pro Battery Grip, which may solve some people's power concerns, as it allows you to keep a battery in the camera while also adding 2 batteries to the bottom, so you can run the camera off of 3 MPF batteries. This does this by using the connection on the bottom of the camera. You can slide the battery tray in and out and the camera will stay powered, which is really nice for long shoots when you don't want to power down the camera. If Blackmagic's numbers are correct, this will give you around 3 hours of recording with the screen brightness at 50%. However, this does make the camera taller and does change the form factor in a way that could be seen as negative for some. If you pick up 3 of the Hawkwood or Blackmagic's own batteries I mentioned earlier, that means that you can have a grand total of 75 watt-hours, which is getting close to the average capacity of a V-Lock battery. We used the battery grip when we were out shooting and managed to shoot for over 3 hours without needing to change a single battery of the camera. So given how affordable MPFs are, I think grabbing a good few will be enough to run the camera for a good few hours, and this was using the EVF and the screen on max brightness as well. So as long as you don't mind the form factor change, this could be a pretty decent option when it comes to the price and power. However, if the Pro Battery Grip isn't a solution you think could work for you, there are plenty of solutions out there already for the Pocket 6K and the 4K to give the camera better battery life. This could be an external V-Lock plate, which there are so many of, or even something like Anton Bauer's Titan base. Just make sure you grab the correct D-tapped 2-pin DC cable. Links to everything are in the description below. With the increase of resolution and frame rates, so have the data rates. Like the Pocket 4K, the 6K and 6K Pro feature a UHS 2 SD port, a TFast 2.0 port, and a USB-C 3.1 Gen 1 port. This gives you a range of options when recording. This is good because these new data rates are massive when compared to the 4K. For example, 6K 3:1 at 30p is 323 megabytes per second, whereas the Pocket 4K in DCI 4K 3:1 at 30p is 135 megabytes per second. That's a big jump, and you will need some beefy media to record these higher data rates. However, one thing that does concern me is the 50p data rates. So if my maths is correct, using Blackmagic's data on their website, 6K 3:1 at 50 FPS will be 538 megabytes per second, and Q0, which is their variable bitrate RAW option, could go as high as 805 megabytes per second. And currently, you won't be able to record that. The fastest SD cards on the market are around 300 megabytes a second, the fastest CFast 2.0 cards on the market are around 500, but there are USB-C SSDs on the market that could handle the 800 megabyte limit of this. However, the limitation here is the Gen 1 port on the Pocket 6K, which is limited to 625 megabytes a second. If Blackmagic had changed this port to Gen 2, it could have handled double that. This port was updated recently on the URSs with the 12K, and I really hoped that Blackmagic would have updated this one here too. As we looked at earlier, I produced a format database that shows what media you need to use for whichever format you'd like to capture. With this, I've included V30 and V90 SD cards, a single CFast 2.0 card, and lastly USB-C, where you are bottlenecked by the 625 megabytes per second max data rate of the USB-C 3.1 Gen 1 port. The color of the format that has been assigned is the minimum needed to record that format based on these theoretical numbers. If you are wanting to record to an external SSD, just make sure you double check what SSD you are using, as data rates can vary between different brands and types of SSDs. There are some out there that max out around 500 megabytes a second, and some that can max out at 3000 megabytes a second. So with the Gen 1 port being limited to 625 megabytes per second, just make sure you grab one that meets that if you want to completely max out what you can record over that port. Blackmagic has some recommended media which you can find via the link in the description below. However, our easy recommendation is Angelbird, who make SD cards, CFast 2.0 cards, and external SSDs, all at the regular speeds you expect. Links to everything we've mentioned are in the description below. When it comes to autofocus, this isn't something Blackmagic have focused on with their cameras. Yes, like previous cameras, the Pocket 6K Pro features autofocus, but it isn't anywhere near as mature as the systems that feature in cameras from the likes of Canon or Sony. This is a push a button, hope it gets focus, which it can in good light, but I would not be relying on it for anything apart from getting focus generally. If autofocus is something you really want to rely on, then this may not be the camera for you. However, if you're happy to manual focus, you have focus peaking in camera and can always pick up a solid follow focus solution. Ones we recommend regularly with the Pocket cameras are Tilta's Nucleus M or Nano, or their Mini follow focus. It just depends on how you plan to rig the camera up and use it. The 6K Pro also features a second mini XLR input, which is great news for anyone wanting to capture two different XLR sources. Both of the ports can provide 48-volt phantom power, so you can use mics that require it. You can toggle this on and off in the menu. Here's a quick test clip we recorded with the Pocket 6K Pro with our MKE600 we used to record these videos. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. When it comes to workflow, this is one of the areas where the Pocket series really shine. As with the rest of Blackmagic's cameras, you get a copy of DaVinci Resolve Studio included in the box, which is really nice. There are a range of key differences between the free and studio version of Resolve, but one of the key differences is the maximum export resolution, as the free version is limited to UHD. So if you're wanting to export 6K out of Resolve, you will need to use the studio version. The free one also doesn't feature a denoiser, whereas the studio one does, and this is good as there is only a little bit of noise reduction happening with the 6K in camera. Whether you shoot either B-roll or ProRes, both are fantastic once you hit post-production, but for slightly different reasons. ProRes has been a standard for post-production workflows for such a long time now that playback and compatibility is top-notch. So if you want a fast, seamless turnaround without heavy amounts of colouring, ProRes is a great option. However, B-roll is also a fantastic option. It's equally as great when it comes to playback, and this is partly due to the way that Blackmagic are half debayering the footage in camera instead of just in post. B-roll is currently supported in Premiere Pro, Avid Media Composer, Edius, and of course, DaVinci Resolve. Once you bring your B-roll clips into your editor of choice, they behave just like you expect from RAW formats. Once your files are in Premiere, you'll be able to access all of your RAW controls by going to the Master tab under Effects Controls. When you bring the footage into Resolve, you can see the same parameters in the Color tab in the bottom left. Here you can adjust things like your color space and gamma, white balance, ISO, etc, etc. Changes to this metadata can then also be written back to a sidecar file, so when you next open the B-roll clip in another program that reads B-roll, these metadata changes will carry over. We did a real deep dive into the post-production side of B-roll in our 12K review, as well as our previous B-roll video, so if this is something you want to learn a bit more on, check out the videos down below. The whole Pocket family can be controlled via HDMI with any of Blackmagic's Atom Mini series of switches, and that means you can remotely control any setting in the camera, plus focus, zoom, and iris on supported lenses. This is a massively overlooked feature and means you can really build up some super affordable streaming or multi-camera productions. If you want us to do a video doing a deep dive on how to get the Pockets working with the Atoms, as well as showing off what you can achieve with them, let us know in the comments below. Like a few of Blackmagic's other cameras, the 6K Pro features Bluetooth, which can be used to control the camera via the official Blackmagic iPad app or via many third-party ones. It seems like the most popular of which is Bluetooth Plus for Blackmagic. This app works really well with the Pockets and allows you to control pretty much everything on the camera. I really like the ability to control focus wirelessly, and this can be really handy if you are setting up the camera by yourself, which I do when recording piece-to cameras at home. We won't be doing a deep dive into the app, but this could be incredibly handy if you want to control the camera while it's in a difficult to reach place. The 6K Pro features the same fantastic Blackmagic OS that people have grown to love. The menu is incredibly fast and easy to use, and it's really refreshing to use when compared to some other camera systems. The camera boots up quickly at around 2 to 3 seconds, which is incredibly fast in comparison to other cinema cameras. The operation of the main home screen is very quick and won't take you very long to get used to. There are 3 gestures which are also handy to know. If you swipe down, this hides the UI. If you swipe left or right, it brings up the clip and project metadata. And lastly, you can zoom in by 2 times by double tapping. You can then pinch to zoom in even further and also move that zoom around the screen. At the main screen, you have the ability to hit the button in the top left that brings up a range of monitoring and exposure tools. You have zebras, peaking, aspect guides, composition overlays, percentage frame guides, and lastly, false color. Otherwise, you can tap on the timecode here to switch between modes and on the audio meters to quickly adjust your gain and headphone output volume. The menu system itself can be accessed by hitting the menu button on the back of the camera. One nice thing here is the camera will remember where you were in the menu when you close the menu. You can also access the menu while you are recording. Everything here is very easy to access and clearly laid out. It is broken down into record, monitor, audio, setup, presets, and LUTs. There are plenty of OS walkthroughs, so I'm only going to be mentioning a handful of things that stand out to me. And if you want to look at this in more detail, I've left a link to the massive 3,000 odd page manual for the camera in the description. The camera features a pixel remap function, which is essentially Blackmagic's black balance function. If you are unfamiliar with a black balance, this feature is only really available on video cameras, and it is basically calibrating the sensor for no light or true black. If your camera has a poor black balance, it will usually exhibit weird or incorrect colors in the darker areas of your image and just be noisier in the darker areas than normal. CMOS sensors don't need to be black balanced as much as older sensor types did, but there isn't anything negative about getting into the habit of black balancing your camera regularly. This process will not only fix these issues, but can also be used to take out dead or lit pixels. So if you end up experiencing any of these issues, make sure to grab your port cap, pop it onto the camera, and run the function. Just make sure your battery's charged. As with many other modern cinema cameras, you have the ability to save and load complete camera setting presets. This is great if you are using the camera across a range of different productions that need different configurations. Though I don't think it's quite as important with this camera as it is with others due to its very snappy and easy to use menu structure and how fast you can change between resolutions and frame rates. But you can save up to 12 presets at once, and once you've got a few loaded, the camera implements them extremely quickly. You can even export them out and import them into a second camera if ever you have multiple on set, which could be possible given the ecosystem that Blackmagic has built with these cameras. Out of the box, the 6K Pro comes with 4 LUTs installed. However, in the LUT tab, you can import up to 6 extra of your own. The 6K supports 33.3D LUTs in .cube format, which can be created in DaVinci Resolve, and 17.3D LUTs converted to .cube format via a LUT conversion program. All you have to do is put them onto any media you're plugging into the camera and load them in through the LUT menu. When you're shooting in B-roll, you can choose to either have the LUT enabled or disabled when you hit Resolve. However, the LUT is carried over as metadata regardless, so there is nothing destructive about using it, and you can decide to toggle it on or off in the camera raw panel in Resolve. When shooting in ProRes, you can do the same thing, but this is choosing whether to burn the LUT in to the clip or not, and is not something you can undo in post. Under the monitoring tab, you can also choose whether the LUT is output via the HDMI or the back LCD or the new EVF. As with the rest of the Blackmagic OS cameras, the 6K Pro features a time-lapse mode, though this is quite limited. You can adjust how often you want to capture a frame by using this slider, and this ranges from 1 every 2 frames all the way to 1 every 10 minutes. 6K is a nice resolution for this, as it means you can still reframe when delivering to 4K or downsample. Though I do wish that this feature was a little bit more fleshed out, like the systems used in DSLR or mirrorless cameras. The camera also handles playback a bit weirdly. There are some restrictions as to what you can play back. If you shoot a mix of B-roll and ProRes, you will only be able to play back the format that the camera is set to. When in B-roll or ProRes, you can only view the resolution that your camera is set to when you hit the playback button. This is also the case if you switch your base frame rate. So if you set the camera to 25, then change to 24 and record a clip, you cannot then play back the 25p clip. However, if you keep your base the same and then change to off-speed mode, you can view these rushes when the camera is set to its base frame rate. It's a shame that you can't just play back all of your clips at once. Hopefully this is something that Blackmagic can fix via a firmware update. Physically, the Pocket 6K Pro is a little bigger than the 6K, which is unsurprising given its additional features. It's also roughly 300 grams heavier, which is not much. Out of the box, you get your camera, an NPF 570 battery, a strap, a 2-pin power supply with 4 different plug adapters, and the software manual, as well as a copy of Blackmagic's DaVinci Resolve Studio. On the front, you have a scroll wheel, which can also act as a button, 2 scratch microphones, a tally light, which you can toggle in the menu, and some vents for airflow. The top is extremely similar to the Pocket 6K. You have a range of buttons and the same physical on-off switch. The main addition is the extra depth, and the grip is also a bit beefier, so it feels a bit nicer in the hand. There is also the new connector for the optional viewfinder and a couple of ventilation grids again. These top function buttons can be rebound and tweaked in the menu system to whatever you prefer. The bottom has actually changed quite a bit. You have the larger battery cover for the new battery type, as well as the battery grip contact point just next to it. Another great addition to the 6K Pro over the 6K is a second 1/4" thread on the bottom of the camera. This is awesome to see. Hopefully all future small form factor cameras from them feature this too. On the left you have the inputs and outputs, which have the same rubber covers as the 6K, which you can easily remove if you want to. Otherwise, you have the same ports, which are 3.5mm mic in, 2.5mm headphone out, a full-size HDMI, USB-C, a very specific 2-pin 12V input, and 2 mini XLR ports. The only addition here over the 6K is the second XLR port we mentioned earlier. On the right, you have the media slots, which are behind a sliding door cover. This is the same as the Pocket 6K. The back has the same button layout, but with the addition of the buttons for the new ND filters and the new tiltable touchscreen. The EVF is also back here, depending on if you want to use it or not. The little notch in the top right of the camera where your thumb rests is also a decent bit bigger, so it feels like you can kind of dig your thumb in there a bit nicer, which is really nice when you're hand holding the camera. With its increased size, I'm very intrigued to see how it behaves on the single grip gimbals that people at this camera's price range will most likely want to use it with, such as the Ronin S2. We actually managed to grab a Ronin S2 and rig the Pocket with a Sigma 18-35 onto it. The camera balance is fine, but the camera twists on the single screw of the Arca Swiss plate when using the follow-focus motor. This is because of the torque of the motor. Our solution to this was to use a small rig extension plate that mounts using both mounting points onto the bottom of the camera, which then eliminates the twist. However, you have to mount the camera to the plate once the camera plate is on the Ronin, and this is because of how close to the tilt axis the camera's right side is. It's so close that you actually can't mount it. Just bear in mind that lens choice will be important here, so make sure to give it a test before purchasing. We didn't have any counterweights, so we used our Revo ring to add some weight to the front of the lens to get our balance as close to perfect as possible. With these hiccups resolved, the rig then balanced and performed really well. If you want to pick up the Pocket 6K Pro with the new Pro EVF and the Pro battery grip, the overall price comes to just over £2,900. So overall, I think for the price, the 6K Pro is an incredibly compelling option for a huge range of shooters. And as long as you understand the camera's limitations and how to work around them, the 6K and 6K Pro can produce some of the nicest imagery at the sub £5,000 price point. However, this sub £5,000 price point is incredibly contested currently with cameras like the Zcam S6, Canon C70, Sony's FX6, FX3 and A7S III, and Red Komodo, all being around this price point and all having their own pros and cons. However, what camera will be best for you will completely come down to how you work and what work you shoot mainly. While any of these cameras at this price point can work for anyone at any work, some are better suited for certain productions than others. However, specs aren't everything, and if you are unsure as to what camera would suit you best, please get in contact with us via the details down in the description below. So in conclusion, the 6K Pro is a logical next step for the Pocket series. It's clear that Blackmagic are listening to their end users, as all of the key upgrades are things I have seen shooters ask for. The image you can get out of this camera is amazing for its price point, just like the original 4K and 6K, and B-RAW is an absolute joy to work with in post-production. The new built-in ND, EVF, and 1500 nit back screen will make shooting in very light conditions much faster and easier, and the new Pro grip could be a really nice solution for powering the camera for a good amount of time. At its price point, it offers something truly unique. However, it isn't perfect, and the inconsistencies in Blackmagic's production and QC are as evident as ever. And whether you get a perfect unit is a lottery you'll need to enter. But with our 14-day return period, this isn't much of a risk. If you want some advice on how to rig out your Pocket 6K Pro for your shooting style, don't hesitate to get in contact with us. Let us know what you think of the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K Pro in the comments below. And to stay up to date with our awesome upcoming content, make sure to hit subscribe and the notification bell. And thank you so much for watching.